Yes, hello to you all once again, and thanks once more for returning to Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we continue to check out some more of those old school vintage dirt bikes from way back in the day, when of course our particular sport at that time was called scrambling and not the modern day interpretation that's now called motocross. Now, the 2022 classic and vintage racing season is now more or less finished for another year here in the UK, but you can still keep up your interest in these old vintage dirt bikes by simply subscribing to my YouTube channel, because we do have some very interesting bikes for you to take a look at through the winter months. So if you've not already subscribed to CDB TV, then I do hope you will do that very small thing, and that way you won't miss out on any of my future video postings. So right now we're going to go back to the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and this is a machine that I came across during my travels over the course of that weekend. And this particular bike here was restored by ex-racer and classic bike builder Keith Ree. So we're going to jump straight into that video and take a look at Roger Harvey's 1979 440 Maico. And so this featured 1979 440 Maico Twinshocker was the legendary Roger Harvey's race bike from back in the day. And when I'd come across it at the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, the machine had just undergone a full restoration, which was all done by another motocross racing legend called Keith Ree, who back in his day was a Maico rider and a works factory rider for the German Kramer motorcycle company back in the early 1980s. Now, Roger Harvey, as you know, was one of Britain's top motocross racers and a former British 125 champion, which he won in 1983. But Roger did have a very bad crash in France in 1985, which broke both of Roger's hips, which then basically ended his motocross racing career. But he then went on to bigger and better things and have a major input when he joined Honda HRC in a managerial post, helping HRC to many championship and Grand Prix victories. So basically, Roger's old battered 440 was given to Keith so that he could work his magic and do a full restoration on this bike, with a view to having it all completed and ready to be handed back to Roger at this 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of what Roger's bike looked like before it was all stripped down, but it's pretty fair to assume that it wasn't in the same condition that we see now. And actually, I think it looks even better than when it did when it left the Maico HQ factory back in 1979. But without a doubt, these 79 440s and of course the iconic 1981 490 Mega 2 were certainly two of Maico's best ever twin shock race bikes, in my opinion. And I've always said that if you couldn't put your hands on a good 490 Mega 2, then these 79 400 or 440s certainly have to be the next best thing, because the frame or chassis geometry is said to be very similar to the 1981 bike, and these 79 440s were a great handling machine as well. And even in this modern day, these 79 Maicos are still much sought after machines. But you can certainly see that Keith spent quite a lot of time and effort to get this bike absolutely right, and as you can see, all of the bike's chassis parts were stripped back to bare metal and then powder coated in this Maico red, with the swing arm and all of the other chassis parts receiving that same powder coating treatment. And as you can see, with the rear swing arm and all the other bits and pieces bolted onto this bike. They're all period correct from 1979. And so as we move on to the bike's power plant, which is a 440 piston port Maico engine that's undergone the full strip down and rebuild process, with every single internal component either refurbished or renewed, just to end up with what's basically now a brand new Maico motor. But for me personally, I can certainly vouch for these 440 two-stroke engines, because I did have the very same power plant in my 1980 bike that I used to race back in the day, and it was just a fantastic motor with a very good spread of power, but maybe not as violent as its bigger brother, the awesome 490, but for an average club rider like myself, these Maico engines were certainly just a job. And once more, I'm sure you're aware that most of these old Maicos were fed their fuel-air mixture through these Bing carburetors, although occasionally riders did tend to swap these Bings for something a bit more modern, even like a Mikuni, for instance. But in my experience, if you take the time to set these carbs up correctly, then they're every bit as good as any Japanese Mikuni or other replacement carburetors. But it's probably pretty fair to say that every single part on this Roger Harvey bike has been given the motocross celebrity treatment by Keith, as Keith spent quite a lot of time making sure that everything was correct before handing it back to Roger, because, as I said, Keith's certainly no stranger to these German Maicos, and he did ride one at the top level back in the day, so he certainly knows his way around these iconic Twinshockers, and most of its parts are genuine 1979 parts, and the front and rear wheels, I'm pretty sure, are original Acront alloy rims that have been again been fully refurbished, which is quite good to see, because it would have been quite easy for Keith just to fit a new pair of maybe XL rims to this Roger Harvey bike, but as you can see, all original and in very good condition once again. And I expect that these front forks have been given the resto treatment as well, because they again look like brand new. And as I recall, the front forks on these 79 bikes did work very well for their time. But we certainly still have the original Maico alloy brake anchor rod and brake backplate fitted, which again is quite rare, because these brake backplates are now being remanufactured. So again, it would have been an easy swap for Keith just to bolt in one of those new alloy replacements, but he certainly wanted to keep Roger's bike in his original stock 79 condition as possible, without of course succumbing to fitting modern replacement parts. And even on the rear brake, we still have that very thin and almost paper-like brake backplate, which, as you remember, it was just like it was manufactured from a Coke can, and it used to wear out very quickly. But this part here on Roger's Maico certainly looks almost like brand new. And once more, the bike's alloy fuel tank was fully refurbished and then repainted to look like brand new once again. And another nice touch here was to also add Roger's name and a little British flag to commemorate Roger's contribution to British motocross racing. Although I have to say that one of the parts that's not original on Roger Harvey's bike is this exhaust expansion chamber, which is a replacement part from DEP pipes. Now again, I suspect that Roger's original stock exhaust that he had fitted to this bike would have been in a pretty dire state after its many years of racing on the track, and the original 79 Maico pipes are almost impossible to find nowadays, which is probably why Keith's gone for this very high quality replacement pipe from DEP, which is identical to the German Maico item, but made of much better quality. Although on the other hand, this tailpipe certainly looks like it's the real deal and the proper stock part for our 79, and these original 79 tailpipes are quite rare to see on these older Maicos, because riders did tend to remove these heavier mild steel items in favour of a much lighter and shinier alloy replacement. So as we move on to the plastics on Roger's Maico, now these have almost certainly been refurbished by Keith himself, because this is another one of Keith's many talents that he employs with his HoLab Concepts business, and that's taking these old motorcycle plastics and then making them like brand new once again. So Keith's another good contact if you need any of your old motocross plastics brought back to life. Or you can also get in touch with Keith maybe through his HoLab Concepts Facebook page. And so as we move on to the rear end of Roger's old race bike, we have a pair of decent period correct rear shocks, and again these were probably all stripped down and then refurbished, and all of the internals renewed and the outside springs repainted just to make them look as good as new once again. But back in the day, these relatively conventional rear suspension systems may not have been the world's best rear shocks for a motocross bike, but I'm assuming that these are the shocks that were bolted onto Roger's bike when he raced it, so the restoration again was all in keeping with the originality of this twin shock racer. Now once more, the bike's seat again is the original Roger Harvey Maico item, and basically this was all taken apart, and then the original seat base and its foam padding were then reused, although the old worn out cover that was fitted onto the seat was just too far gone to be rescued, and so this quite nice new replacement item was then stitched in its place to keep the finished look of the bike nice and tidy. Now up at the bike's cockpit controls, we have firstly a pair of what I assume are Maico handlebars, which are very rare items, and it's not often that you can still see these parts fitted onto these older German machines, so these are certainly very interesting to see on this restoration. But the grips are replacement rental items, and the levers for the clutch and that front brake are Magura parts, complete of course with their lever covers, just to try and help keep dust and debris from entering those cable ends. And also surprisingly, on our 440 engine we also have a decompressor lever fitted to aid the starting of that Maico engine, although personally speaking I did have the self-same engine on my old 1984-40, and I can't say that I had any real problems with firing up, and it never had a decompressor fitted in its place. Although having said that, you certainly still needed a steady hand on this throttle gasser when you were on the track, because although these piston port 440 engines weren't as violent as I said as its bigger 490 brother, they could still catch you out if you gave it a handful and weren't ready for that reaction. But for sure this has certainly been another top quality restoration by Keith, and let's face it, who wouldn't be happy being handed this specimen to add to their motorcycle collection. And if you're a regular visitor to my YouTube channel, you'll more than likely have already come across more of Keith's motocross restorations when he performed a similar process on some of Terry Pickering's off-road collection not so long ago. But for sure these 79 440s were great bikes for their time, although the 1980 model that followed wasn't the very best bike that Maico had produced. But of course Maico did get their sums and calculations absolutely spot on the year after when they launched that awesome 81 490 Mega 2, which is still regarded as one of the best twin shock motocrossers ever made. And for me personally, I still think that these 79s were almost as good as the Mega 2, although it may be not as quick. And there's certainly no disputing the fact that these 79 German Maicos certainly had the look. Although on the day Roger was certainly well pleased with Keith's workmanship when he turned up at the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show to be reunited with his old race bike. And I expect that Roger won't be looking to sling his leg over this bike sometime soon and get back racing once again, but he'll more than likely just find a nice corner in his garage or even his home where he can sit and look at the bike and reminisce of the great days he had racing his old 79 440 when these older Maico Twinshockers were certainly kings of the racetrack. So there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that. That's Roger Harvey's old 1979 440 Maico Twinshocker, completely restored by Keith Ree. But I do hope you'll all join me again very soon when we take a look at yet more of these type of vintage classics, when we all return to your #1 and your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.